West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire. So
we've actually just got some breaking news out of Colorado. We're going to stay with Christy Greenberg and Hugo Lowell to talk about it. The Colorado Supreme Court ruling that Donald Trump has now been disqualified from being on the primary ballot for the GOP. Again, this breaking news out of Colorado. Donald Trump, as we know, was fighting to be able to be on that primary ballot. The Colorado Supreme Court now issuing a 200-something page opinion that we've just got. And we're going to go back to Christy Greenberg and Hugo Lowell. I know, guys, you haven't had a chance to look at it. We're looking at it right now. It's 217 pages. But, Christy, I want to start with you on this particular issue. This is not the first state that there's been an attempt to be able to disqualify Trump being able to be on the ballot. But what's intriguing about it is that it's now being done in a way where the judicial system is having a say in terms of whether or not somebody can be on a ballot. Your thoughts about what we're hearing coming out of Colorado at this time?
Well, it is an interesting decision because the Colorado District Judge, Sarah Wallace, last month when she made her decision, she had a really puzzling decision where she found, based on the evidence, that Trump had engaged in insurrection, but essentially said, well, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it doesn't apply to presidents. He's not an officer such that it applies to him, which was a really odd result. So when that was appealed, I think a lot of people had been scratching their heads and thought the appeal was appropriate. And, I haven't read the basis of this, but it sounds like at least the Colorado Supreme Court said no. Actually, if he engaged in insurrection, yes, he is an officer and the 14th Amendment would apply to him. It would be a perverse result otherwise to have it apply to members of Congress and others in lower elected officials and not to the President of the United States. So it sounds like Colorado Supreme Court got it right in finding that this should apply to the president and presumably determines that the factual findings of the district court in finding that he engaged in the insurrection were upheld. So it is a result that is interesting. It is a result that seems like the right result. The big question will be whether or not it holds, because this is surely going to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I have a lot less confidence that the U.S. Supreme Court will decide that Donald Trump should be disqualified from the ballot, given that conservative majority on that court.
I also want to bring in now former federal prosecutor and the host of the podcast Justice Matters, Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, again, I know that this is literally just coming across the wire right now, but I want to bring to our viewers' attention something that's on page 8 of this 200-page opinion. This is what the Colorado Supreme Court has held. 1, Section 3 that Christy was just talking about, Glenn, encompasses, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, let's be clear, encompasses the office of the presidency and someone who has taken an oath as president. On this point, the district court committed reversible error. And so it's cleared up that issue of how can you be the president of the United States and not be deemed to be an officer for purposes of your oath. In addition, Glenn, the district court did not err in concluding that the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 constituted a, quote, insurrection. The district court did not err in concluding that President Trump engaged in, and that's in quotes, that insurrection through his personal actions. And then President Trump's speech inciting the crowd that breached the U.S. Capitol on January 6 was not protected by the First Amendment. Glenn, we've been talking for days, if not weeks, about this idea of Donald Trump trying to hide behind the First Amendment to be able to give an excuse for what is otherwise going to be clear criminal conduct. Your thoughts about what this Supreme Court kind of ruling has now said as well?
You know, it's interesting, Katie, because all along it has felt like anybody with a basic understanding of the English language would read Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and conclude that Donald Trump is disqualified from serving in the event a court found that he engaged in insurrection. And what's really interesting now, getting down into the legal weeds a little bit, you know, the Colorado trial court found as a matter of fact, after a trial on the merits, a trial at which several witnesses testified, expert witnesses, witnesses who were at the Capitol that day, found as a matter of fact that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection. And the reason that's so important as the case works its way through the appellate system now is factual findings like that are ordinarily given great deference in the appellate courts, because only the trial court judge gets to see the witnesses as they testify, assesses their demeanor, and reaches factual findings. So the fact that the trial court judge, in the estimation of the Colorado Supreme Court, got the legal conclusion wrong, and the Colorado Supreme Court basically reviewed that de novo from jump, and reached a different conclusion. That's one thing. But the fact that we have these factual findings from a trial court should, frankly, continue to win the day up through the appellate court system, up to and including the Supreme Court. Because as long as those factual findings are supported by evidence of record, and they were, you know, this is going to be a real danger zone now moving forward for Donald Trump.
So, Hugo, I think we have Hugo still, right? Hugo, I want to read something to you that we also found here. It says, the sum of these parts is this: President Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president under Section 3. Because he's disqualified, it would be a wrongful act under the election code for the secretary to list him as a candidate on the presidential primary ballot. We do not reach these conclusions lightly. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law without fear or favor and without being swayed by public reaction to the decisions that the law mandates we reach. I mean, Hugo, we talk about some of the major cases like in D.C., Mar-a-Lago, New York, et cetera, that seem to be kind of what Donald Trump is battling in terms of a legal front. But as we were talking about with Christy a few minutes ago and now with Glenn, there's these pockets of cases that are coming up, and they're intended and designed to ensure that we don't have another insurrection, another crazy second term with Donald Trump. Is this going to change the litigation calculus, the strategy calculus for Donald Trump now, considering this decision coming out of Colorado?
I think it necessarily changes the calculus. You know, I can tell you with certainty, according to our sources, that Trump and his team did not anticipate ever getting removed from the ballot at all. And after the district court's decision in Colorado that kind of left him just off the hook, they thought that would be the end of the road. You know, the Colorado issue was all over. And I'm speculating now, but I assume that the fact that the appeals court has ruled that Trump should be struck off the ballot will come as a surprise to them. I just texted someone at the campaign, and they've not responded to me yet about, kind of what they are thinking. But this is something that has also been weighing on, I think, the lawyers' minds as well, because they have consistently called January 6th, this was a First Amendment thing, this was core political speech. This is an argument they have made in the D.C. federal case, is an argument they've made in their motion to dismiss in Georgia, and this was generally the argument they were settling on with respect deflected any questions about January 6th and what Trump said at the Ellipse rally. Of course, the D.C. District Court has also, rejected Trump's arguments that the core political speech makes him immune from prosecution because they found, Judge Chutkan essentially found that it is not immunizing if the speech was in furtherance of a crime. And I think the fact that this is all piling up necessarily has to change his legal calculus going into the new year.
So we also have the pleasure of having Ruth Ben-Ghiat actually come in a little bit early in the show, historian and NYU professor. Ruth, we talk a lot, you and I, about accountability, what it looks like, what it should look like, and whether or not we're actually ever going to see it in order to protect democracy as we know it. Your thoughts about the fact that now a Colorado Supreme Court has said that Donald Trump not only that there was an insurrection on 1/6, but that he engaged in that insurrection through his personal actions, and that his inciting of the crowd on that day is not protected First Amendment speech. We talk a lot about how Donald Trump elects to use words in speech in order to spur violence or to spur action by the people that follow him.
Yeah, I can't overestimate how important it is for the American people to see this kind of accountability coming down. And I've often said, thinking of what's happened to other autocrats, that some kind of ban would be ideal as a solution. In fact, Silvio Berlusconi, who left office with dozens of indictments, after he left for the final time, he was banned from running for office for 5 years. And this is what kind of deflated his personality cult. And Jair Bolsonaro, a former Brazilian president, is banned from politics or running for office until 2030. So this is something that's been done elsewhere, and I've been saying for some time that it would be something ideal in America, but I did not think that this would happen. And I'm very pleased from the point of view of democracy protection.
Christy, I'd like to go back to you. Farther on within this opinion, it does state that, quote, we stay our ruling until January 4th, 2024, the day before the secretary's deadline to certify the content of the presidential primary ballot. If review is sought in the Supreme Court before the stay expires on January 4th, then the stay shall remain in place and the secretary will continue to be required to include President Trump's name on the 2024 presidential primary ballot until the receipt of any order or mandate from the Supreme Court. So obviously, Christy, this court knows where this is heading. This court knows where the ultimate destination is for this particular litigation. Your thoughts about whether the Supreme Court will most certainly take up this question, which is clearly of importance?
Yes, I mean, they will take this up quickly. This is given the fact that the ballots are going to be coming out, voters are going to be voting throughout in primaries. This is a live issue. It is an issue where, unlike Trump in the other cases on the immunity issue, where he's made the argument haste makes waste and we should be deliberate and we should be careful and we should take our time. Now you're going to see Trump saying the opposite, telling the Supreme Court, you've got to move fast because I need my name on the ballot for these primaries. So it's going to be interesting to see the tension between these cases and the different positions that he is taking about how fast to move.
It is Wednesday, the 20th of December of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious the little Yorkie is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome insurgents? You know, Trump's lawyers are going to argue in front of the Supreme Court that you can't call him the leader of an insurrection because by that time it was already an insurgency. So therefore, the Constitution doesn't say anything about an insurgency, only an insurrection. So therefore, this Nazi should be put back on the ballot. They won't say it exactly like that, but that's what they mean. And they don't mean it in a pejorative way either. No. When they say we want this Nazi on the ballot so this Nazi can become president of the United States, they mean it as like it's a good thing. And by dint of the fact that millions, tens of millions of people believe the same thing, just proves the brainwashing works. Of course, that's a cop-out. Because that behavior and attitude, you don't need much brainwashing for some. In fact, not any. Like they say, if there was no demand, there'd be no supply. Apparently, there's a big demand for fascism in America. Yeah. All right. No wonder they want to get rid of all the books. They want to get rid of all the actual teachers so a Prager university can fill the little kid's head with a bunch of, well, 1930s, except, not the bad things. Yeah, Prager was on TV. He got interviewed by this MSNBC journalist or NBC journalist who has been going around and visiting schools and talking to teachers all across America to pretty much prepare her for a little sit-down with Dennis Prager. Who do we know Dennis Prager from? Well, because he was part of the Swift Boat operation to Swift Boat John Kerry. You know, alternative histories. I have proof. Do you? So yeah, Prager was part of that cabal. And he had a right-wing radio show, so, didn't everybody? Who had no moral structure, who thought the only way to save America was take it away from it being a representative democracy and turn it into a totalitarian, authoritarian, neo-Nazi, Christo-fascist government. So yeah, this journalist, and she was quite comprehensive and thorough in her work, sat down with Prager, and Prager said right there, I want to get education back to what it was like in the 1930s, except without the bad things. So what I remember of the 1930s from, and now I got to tell you, maybe I was brainwashed as a little kid because I had access to a lot of books growing up in the house of an academic who happened to be a history professor, who happened to have, I don't know, 11,000 books at home? Just the home library? And then I had access to his office also, not at any time I wanted, but, I could go there when he was there and peruse the books on those shelves. So I don't know. Maybe I'm the one that was brainwashed. Well, what I remember in the 1930s from the bad things is, the hanging elm and the lynching oak. Pretty much sometimes on the schoolyard. And when pressed, he really didn't say that those were bad things. In fact, I think to Dennis Prager, those would be fond memories for our little kiddies, the blue-eyed white ones, to remember the good things of America. What he's talking about is that damn commie FDR. If we could get rid of the FDR of the 30s, we would be a lot better today. Yeah. And that tells you everything you need to know, because they need an economic crisis to be able to hang their hat on and become fascists all over the world. They've done it before, and they keep doing it again, and now here we are. Why is it that the Republicans voted down on security measures to keep foreign governments, hostile foreign governments, from not only meddling in our elections, but being active participants in that meddling with the actual participants in the elections? used to be that, the FBI and the DOJ would haul those people off to jail, and I'm not talking about just Trump. Yeah, they changed the law so they can't do that. You're not taking me. It violates the speech and debate clause. What, the speech and debate to overthrow the United States of America and the peaceful transfer of power? How can that be? How can the speech and debate clause cover that? Okay. So, old Donnie's going to be kicked off the ballot, albeit ever so briefly in Colorado. We know that. He's not actually off the ballot yet. They got till January 4th, and Trump has already said he's going to appeal. I picked a clip from when it first hit the airwaves because I kind of liked it. One thing that they didn't get to because it had been so early and they weren't able to pour over it the amount of time that we had was that the Colorado Supreme Court quoted Gorsuch. Yeah. Put him on the spot. Now, let's be clear. The Supreme Court is not like really a liberal Supreme Court. In fact, the three justices who dissented from the opinion are all Democrats. And who brought the suit? 4 Republican voters and an independent. So I just love all of these, well, I don't know what to call them, deplorable MAGAs, who are just whining that it's some sort of plot and it's Joe Biden, genocide Joe Biden, pulling the strings, he's running everything. The only reason they think that would be happening in the United States of America is that's what Trump did already. Trump thinks that if he does something, everybody is doing it worse. So he has to do it because everybody else is doing it worse. Great. Got a bunch of people who have no education about civics whatsoever trying to tell us what civics is. And here we are. Let's have a civil war. Yeah, try it. I have heard some people say that there's no way a civil war is going to happen because we have the army on our side. And I'm sometimes wondering, do we? Yeah, we do. But it would be nice to purge some more of the Nazis that have been embedded and infiltrated into our military and kick them out. And I'm all for putting ankle bracelets on them or something. Maybe an underskin RFD, some sort of remote frequency device so that we can track them, a geo-tracking device. Let's do that. Embedded right under their skin. We'll put it underneath their neck like they do in the movies. Right in the back there. Let's do that. Ankle bracelet will work until we do the more, bizarre thing. Because we ought to fight fire with fire. No, we can't lose our moral compass in the midst of this. But I got to say, bending over backwards for these people because a process and procedure is BS. And we all know it. Trump's going to take this to the Supreme Court, and Gorsuch is going to not even look at his precedent when he wrote an opinion about this very subject. Yeah, I'm going to be real interested in seeing how this court's going to claim that you can't take the original intent of the founders or the language that was used at the time to decide on a legal issue now. That's how they got the Second Amendment interpreted the way they do. Now, this is how topsy-turvy turnaround it all is. They claim they have a Second Amendment right to overthrow the United States of America, and that 14th Amendment was just some sort of quaint thing and has no standing, and it doesn't really even exist, so go away. We don't have a 14th Amendment to save the Constitution. They have a Second Amendment right to hold it hostage and take everything over. Some of them really believe that. Eric Erickson was out, I love his ranting and drivel, claiming that, this is the most terrible thing, Kamala Harris, or, yeah, that's probably how he does it, but Kamala Harris helped raise funds for Black Lives Matter, and they burned down whole cities. He said that. Black Lives Matter burned down cities. People actually believe this. People in my little town of Rogue River, I've tried to set them straight, but they're just so convinced that cities were burned down. Portland is burned down now. It's like, do you ever go there? My God. You can't be that much of a hillbilly. And apparently there are people who just won't venture out of the 5-mile radius that, I don't know, they claim to be home. Portland's burned down. Eric Erickson claims that Black Lives Matter burned down whole cities. I had to set him straight. No cities were burned down. I'll tell you why people believe this is the same reason they believe that the crime is just at all-time highs and people are being murdered right and left, and we got like flash mobs invading stores and taking all the stuff out. These like flash mob shoplifters. None of that ever happened. Or if it does, it happens so infrequently. Crime is down dramatically. Murders are down dramatically. Robberies are down dramatically, etc., etc., etc. But everybody believes it's just going through the roof, and that's because the media makes it so. People believe, well, some people believe that whole cities were burned down. Black Lives Matter did it because they saw the same literal dumpster on fire in front of a federal courthouse. Over and over and over. A tight shot of it, too. Right there, it's like flickering out of the dumpster, and it's like lighting up the granite walls of the courthouse. And there's some obvious broken stuff laying about. Whole cities burned down. It was literally a tight shot of a dumpster fire. I bring up the fact that you'll have to show me where are the funds that have been allocated to rebuild these cities that were burned down to the ground. Because you go there and you're like, wow, man. They were able to put this city back to almost like what it looked like before it was burned down to the ground. How did they do that? So quick, too. Yeah, well, you got all those Disney Imagineers leaving Cal Arts and working for Prager University now, apparently. Yikes. Yeah. Because they think they were doing the devil's work. Well, if you were at Cal Arts and you thought you were doing the devil's work, maybe Prager University is exactly for you. Mm-hmm. All right. Nazi propaganda doesn't have anything on us today. We've perfected it. Yes, we have. All right, what do we have in store for you today here as we begin in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, we went over the top about Colorado doing what they've done, and thank you. Thank you. It feels like country roads have taken me home to that Rocky Mountain High. Yes, it has. On the rest of the menu, Tesla's recall of 2 million vehicles to fix its autopilot system uses technology that may not work. Wow. Where have we heard that before with Elon? The ACLU of Montana is challenging the law defining the word sex in state code as only male and female. And Southwest Airlines and its pilots reached a tentative labor agreement after 3.5 years of negotiations. Well, it's about time. Now that's Bidenomics. And that's a good thing. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Airbnb has admitted to misleading Australian customers by charging in US dollars instead of Australian. And Greece has approved a new law granting undocumented migrants residence rights, provided they have a job. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Forgo the usuals that we usually go through at this moment, but we just want to say thank you to Kelly and Tom for everything that they do here at Netroots Radio. Thank you, guys. All right, let us delve into or tuck into this first offering here by Tom Kreischer of the Associated Press. Here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tesla's recall of more than 2 million of its electric vehicles, an effort to have drivers who use its autopilot system pay closer attention to the road, relies on technology the research shows may not work as intended. Tesla, the leading manufacturer of EVs, reluctantly agreed to the recall last week after a 2-year investigation by the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had found that Tesla's system to monitor drivers was defective and required a fix. The system sends alerts to drivers if it fails to detect torque from hands on the steering wheel, a system that experts describe as ineffective. In fact, what the experts say is that they need night vision cameras to keep track of where the eyes are. Are they on the road checking the mirrors and the gauges? Or are they falling asleep? Are they reading a book? Government documents filed by Tesla say the online software change will increase warnings and alerts to drivers to keep their hands on the steering wheel. It also may limit the areas where the most commonly used versions of autopilot can be used, though that isn't entirely clear in Tesla's documents. The administration began its investigation in 2021 after receiving 11 reports of Teslas that were using the partially automated system crashed into parked emergency vehicles. Since 2016, the agency has sent investigators to at least 35 crashes in which Teslas that were suspected of operating on a partially automated driving system hit parked emergency vehicles, motorcyclists, or tractor-trailers that crossed in the vehicle's paths, causing a total of 17 deaths. Beth Hansen of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The ACLU of Montana has filed a lawsuit challenging a law that defines the word sex throughout the state code as either male or female, based on a person's biology at birth. The plaintiffs argue the law denies legal recognition and protections to people who are gender nonconforming. The plaintiffs, a transgender man, a two-spirit Native American, a non-binary person, an intersex individual, and a nurse practitioner, also moved for a summary judgment in Monday's filing in state court in Missoula, asking for the law to be declared unconstitutional. Republican lawmakers who supported the bill seem to think they can simply legislate away the diversity of Montana's residents. Akila Deernose, the executive director of the ACLU of Montana, said in a statement. The sponsor of the legislation said it was needed to clarify from a legal standpoint that the words sex and gender are not interchangeable. That was in response to a ruling by a state judge in 2021 that overturned a law that said people who had to have a surgical procedure before they could change their sex on their birth certificate. The judge ruled the law was vague because it did not define what type of surgery was needed and that transgender individuals should be able to change their gender on such documents. Tennessee, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas have similar provisions in place. In Kansas, a law defining male and female has prevented Democratic Governor Laura Kelly's administration from allowing transgender people to change their driver's licenses and birth certificates. But transgender residents are challenging its constitutionality. Staff brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Southwest Airlines and its pilots reached a tentative labor agreement after 3.5 years of negotiations, the last of the four major airlines to reach a deal with pilots. The Dallas-based carrier said yesterday, Tuesday, it was pleased to reach the agreement in principle, which it called a key milestone. Specific terms of the agreement were not disclosed, but pilots at American, United, and Delta have won raises of roughly 40% over 5 years. The Southwest pilots opened a strike center in Dallas last month and twice asked federal mediators for permission to begin a 30-day countdown to a strike, but they were rejected both times. The Southwest Pilots Association said its 25-member board of directors will evaluate the agreement and, if approved, will present it to the roughly 11,000 pilot members. The tentative deal comes just weeks after flight attendants at Southwest rejected a tentative deal after 5 years of talks during which the group did not receive raises. All right, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, way past Alice and the Wizard. A new project from Hayao Miyazaki is always an occasion, and his new and somewhat autobiographical The Boy and the Heron doesn't disappoint. A project 7 years in the making, it features Miyazaki's signature hand-drawn animation said to have proceeded at about a minute of production per month. The result, when viewed on the big screen, is like being inside a dynamic watercolor. The story set in wartime Japan, where 12-year-old Mahito loses his mother in an air raid. His father, a military industrialist, retreats to his late wife's sister's country estate with the traumatized Mahito. And yet, Dad is now married to the sister, Natsuko, who is pregnant and subsequently disappears. It's here where he meets an array of characters, from Natsuko's wizened maids to the very strange talking heron who lures Mahito to an abandoned haunted tower on the property with promises of reuniting him with his mother. In the tower, Mahito sinks through the floor to the upside down, if you will, a conflictual world of variously allied or warring factions of weird human, animal, and miscellaneous, for lack of a better term, beings and edifices through which he must navigate. In this upside down, Mahito finds Natsuko in a delivery room, a Freudian touch, but only a sample of the symbolism permeating this one. Part of Miyazaki's wisdom is to leave a lot to interpretation. It's a coming-of-age story, to be sure, but an expansive one encompassing finding one's place between ancestors and descendants, choosing the comfort of fantasy or the reality of life, and being resilient in the face of conflict and uncertainty. The Boy and the Heron is one not to miss, but animated or not, leave the kids at home. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Gaines. Arthritis affects more than 1 in 5 adults and is the most common cause of disability in the United States. Dr. Camille Barber is a researcher with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to control arthritis. Welcome to the show, Camille.
Thank you.
Camille, are there different types of arthritis?
Yes, there are over 100 types. The most common types are osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, gout, and fibromyalgia.
What are the symptoms of arthritis?
Arthritis, which is joint inflammation, can result in pain, stiffness, and swelling in the joints.
Does arthritis affect some people more than others?
Yes, it affects primarily the elderly. It also affects people with chronic conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. And it's also much higher in women compared to men.
What are some strategies for managing arthritis pain?
Now, adults with arthritis may be reluctant to engage in physical activity because of the symptoms that they have, such as joint pain and stiffness. However, we know that there are low-impact types of physical activities, such as walking and swimming, that have been shown to improve function and reduce pain in adults with arthritis. There are also self-management programs that, in addition to these physical activity programs, have different ways to maintain weight and other ways to control your arthritis symptoms.
How can people reduce their risk of developing arthritis?
So as I said earlier, osteoarthritis is the most common type of arthritis, and the best way to reduce your chances of developing it is to maintain a normal weight and avoid joint injury.
Camille, where can listeners get more information about arthritis, including the self-management program?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/arthritis.
Thanks, Camille. I've been talking today with CDC's Dr. Camille Barber about ways to control the pain caused by arthritis. Remember, although there's no cure, arthritis can be controlled through medical treatment, regular exercise, and weight maintenance. If you suffer from arthritis, talk to a healthcare provider about programs to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Robert Gaines for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. Allowing the currently or formerly incarcerated the right to vote has been a political football for decades, but attitudes are shifting, and at the state and federal level, pro-voter legislation aims to re-enfranchise Americans both in and out of prison. Policies range from Vermont, Maine, and the District of Columbia, where all incarcerated citizens can vote, to the 23 states where voting rights are restored upon release. In 22 states, voting rights may be restored by an act of a governor, judge, or board, or the completion of parole or restitution. In Mississippi, while restoration is possible, it has been wielded as a voter suppression tool, as a federal court ruled earlier this year. The trend, though, has been to restore the rights of returning felons upon release, as Minnesota and New Mexico did in 2023, and to repeal lifetime disenfranchisement. Voting Rights Lab reports that legal action in Delaware last week aims to ensure mail-in voting for misdemeanor offenders and prisoners awaiting trial. Also last week, the Inclusive Democracy Act was introduced in Congress by Vermont U.S. Senator Peter Welch and Massachusetts U.S. Representative Ayanna Pressley. The bill would allow eligible incarcerated citizens the right to vote in federal elections regardless of criminal convictions. Expect more legislation re-enfranchising the current and formerly incarcerated in 2024. We have links to the rules in your state at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
If you thought that courts wouldn't try to further gut the 1965 Voting Rights Act, think again. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In 2013, the Supreme Court, 5-4, in a case from Shelby County, Alabama, killed more than half of the historic Voting Rights Act of 1965 by striking down what's called preclearance. Preclearance meant that a state or county with a long history of racial discrimination in voting had to get an okay, a preclearance, from a federal court or the Department of Justice before it changed its voting procedures. After the court killed preclearance, areas with racially biased voting histories closed polling places, purged voter rolls, truncated early voting, instituted racially biased voter ID laws, and so on. Then, in 2023, the Supreme Court, which has blessed blatant political gerrymandering in a clear case of racially motivated gerrymandering, did not strike down the rest of the Voting Rights Act. A big sigh of relief was warranted. But the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has just ruled that private citizens and civil rights groups no longer can bring a challenge under the Voting Rights Act. If that case were to be upheld by the Supreme Court, it would gut what remains of that crucially important law. We await the High Court's decision. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was the day South Carolina announced the Union is dissolved. The pronouncement was a direct response to the presidential election of Abraham Lincoln a month earlier. South Carolina was the first of 11 states to secede from the Union. They were resolved to preserve their system of slave labor. Many debate the reasons why and will cite states' rights or tariffs and taxes as primary causes. But South Carolina issued a declaration of immediate causes just 4 days after its state legislature passed the Ordinance of Secession. According to James Lewin, author of The Confederate and Neo-Confederate Reader, this declaration opposed Northern states' rights of refusal to support slavery. It stated that there was, quote, an increasing hostility on the part of non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery, that the Northern states had failed to fulfill their constitutional obligations by interfering with the return of fugitive slaves to bondage. South Carolinians were also upset that they could no longer travel traveled to northern states with their slaves in tow. They were furious that New England states allowed black men to vote. This declaration complains that northern states have, quote, denounced as sinful the institution of slavery. They have permitted the open establishment among them of societies whose avowed object is to disturb the peace and elloign the property of the citizens of other states. They have encouraged and assisted thousands of our slaves to leave their homes, and those who have remained have been incited by emissaries, books, and pictures to servile insurrection. Other Confederate states would craft similar documents. The Civil War to end slavery would begin in Charleston, South Carolina, the following April.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 45 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting to be a bit warmer than yesterday. We should be getting highs around 60 degrees. Foggy conditions currently will become sunny later on this afternoon. Winds are light and variable and will remain so throughout the day. A few passing clouds overnight with lows in the upper 30s, winds light and variable. Then partly cloudy skies tomorrow with highs once again near 60, winds light and variable, and we should be getting more rain on Friday, if not Thursday night. Pollen is rated as none here in the little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 20 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains in the low range at level 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.87 inches. Visibility is down to a half mile, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. And that is the Weather Underground, of course. London is 51 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 49 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 53 and clear. Bagram is 38 and clear. Kyiv is 41 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 44 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 60 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees with a flood advisory because of heavy rain. Chicago, Illinois is 37 degrees and fair. And New York is 38 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Rod McGurk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Dateline, Canberra, Australia. An Australian court on Wednesday yesterday ordered Airbnb to pay a 15 million Australian dollar fine which pegs out to be about $10 million in U.S. dollars. And the accommodation rental company could pay as much again in compensating customers who had been unaware they were being charged in U.S. rather than Australian dollars. Airbnb admitted making false or misleading representations to Australian users between January of 2018 and August of 2021 that prices shown on its platform for Australian accommodations were in Australian dollars, which are worth less than the greenback. For about 63,000 customers, the prices were in U.S. dollars. Federal Court Justice Brenda McElwain ordered Airbnb to pay a 15 million Australian dollar fine within 30 days for breaching Australian consumer law, plus another $400,000 in Australian money in prosecution costs. Airbnb had earlier provided the court with an undertaking that it would pay as much as 15 million Australian in compensation to eligible customers.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Greece's parliament yesterday, Tuesday, overwhelmingly approved new legislation that will grant tens of thousands of undocumented migrants residence and work permits amid a shortage of unskilled labor. They're not putting their kids in the factories, apparently. What are they, un-American? The law, drafted by the center-right government, links the right to residence with proof of employment. According to the Labor Ministry, it will affect some 30,000 people, many of them agricultural laborers. The United Nations Migration and Refugee Agencies praise the new law, which applies to migrants who have been living in Greece without residence permits for at least 3 years up to the end of November. It will not cover later arrivals. Lawmakers in the 300-member parliament voted 262 in favor of the law, despite grumbling from the governing New Democracy's right wing and with the backing of left-wing opposition parties. New Democracy had threatened to expel any of its lawmakers who didn't back the measures, making a single exception for a former prime minister who had strongly criticized the bill. Speaking after the vote, Migration Minister Dimitris Karadis praised the cross-party consensus, saying it would help address market demand for less skilled workers. He said the government seeks to blend strict border controls and fighting migrant trafficking with facilitating legal migration according to Greece's needs. He said the new law would not allow for illegal gain of Greek citizenship or family reunification rights, and the permits would be contingent on migrants' continued employment. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.